Let me start today's class with a confession. I don't learn what love looks like from poetry. That's the first confession I would like to make, and I learned it from cinema, in fact. So I didn't learn ambition from epics, I learned it from stories on screen. So this confession might sound universal. I'm representing the modern group. Individually, the story could have been different, but as a representative of this modern individual who continues to live a fragmented life after that chaos created um, after Second World War, mid 20th century. So now pause for a second and think: if this is true for us, what is true for us? What I have just told you, if I have learned it from, learned, to love from cinema instead of poetry, or I got these ambitions not from epics but from stories on screen. So, if this is true for us, then what exactly is literature doing today? You see, once meaning began to circulate through screens rather than pages, media studies become unavoidable in this situation. And once media began to replace reality, postmodernism stepped in to explain the confusion. And that is where you have the relevance of postmodernism. And once identity itself became unstable, we had to think, rethink what a self even means. So we live in a mediated culture where meaning shifts from text to image. Reality is mediated by representation. Reality is formed by something created or shared on screen. Could be any media for that matter. So identity becomes constructed and it's not inherited. These are all very profound things. Perhaps though we live this reality, but to make better sense of this fragmented reality, or this very confused reality, perhaps takes a lot of labor. I want you to focus, because there is no other way than to just stay focused to understand. We'll try to make it clearer, to a possible extent. So here we have one more, question, like, why media studies always follows cultural studies. We did have a session on cultural studies the other day, means, or, yesterday. So now is the imperative, inevitable question. Why does this media studies follow cultural studies? So now remember where we stopped last time, which means yesterday. Cultural studies asked a simple but dangerous question. What was it? How is meaning produced? So, media studies asked the next question. If cultural studies had this question, how is meaning produced? Media studies asked the next one. Where does meaning circulate now? Earlier, meaning traveled through books, slowly, carefully. But now it travels through images instantly and repeatedly. That's the difference. So don't think of media studies as a separate theory. Think of it as cultural studies moving closer to everyday life. You repeatedly hear these lines, repeatedly just give yourself to these thoughts. Then only these things begin to make sense, because you're not trying to understand these things, a fragmented reality, from a detached point, position, because you are very much lost in it. We all. So when you yourself have been lost in that, condition or predicament or plight, or modern man's, plight, or this fragmented reality, that itself has become a kind of identity, though it is a constructed identity, not a inherited one. It takes, as I told you, a mammoth task, mammoth kind of endeavor to understand what is it. That is why single perhaps you can attendance in this kind of session, or listening to such thing once will not suffice. You need to repeatedly hear, read, write these things. Then only things begin to sink in. So Then the next immediate question is, what is media? When we say media, we don't just mean newspapers or television. That you need to bear in your mind. Media refers to technologies of communication system that carry images, stories, and ideas. Print, film, television, digital platforms, all of them. So here is the key thing. Media does not simply show reality, it selects, it frames, it repeats. I'll tell you again, media does not simply show reality, it frames, it selects, it and repeats. So let me ask you, if media decides what you see every day, today, who is shaping your reality today? Let us now focus on this thing because what warranted this arrival of media culture? What happens or why this transition from literature to media culture becomes relevant here in 21st century in modern world? So what was it earlier and what has changed now? Earlier, meaning came from text, slow reading, reflection, interpretations were all features of our studies or texts, you can say literary text. Now meaning comes from speed. That's the difference. From repetition, from images that don't ask for interpretations, but only reaction. So they expect reaction, not interpretations. Example, news headlines, film stereotypes, viral narratives. So the question changes from what does the text mean to who controls the image. So obviously, every theory session needs anchors. We do have a few here too. So, key thinkers in media studies. For media and postmodernism, remember these names: McLuhan, Hall, Baudrillard, and Foucault. These are the major, names pop up often along with this very word media studies. So UGC NET does not expect you to philosophize endlessly. So it expects you to recognize thinkers, concepts, and their logic. I hope you are getting the things. So we have a man, called Marshall McLuhan, one of those four I've just quoted in my previous slide. So what is his core message? It's there on your screen. And things to remember, understanding media, very important work of Marshall McLuhan, published in 1964. Now, Marshall McLuhan says something shocking. He says the medium is message. The medium is the message. So what does he mean by that? At first it sounds honestly strange, but listen carefully. He means the form of media matters more than the content. That is what he is trying to say. The form of media matters or is important more than the actual content it carries. How do we understand that? Print, trained us to think linearly. Print anything in the form of, print or printed textbooks or literary works or whatever that conventional, sources of wisdom, knowledge that we got through books. So they prepared us or trained to think linearly, which means in an order, from a chronological order. But screens, what we are exposed to today or what we submit ourselves to, today, they train us to think in fragments. So technology does not just carry messages, it reshapes the human mind. That is what Marshall McLuhan is trying to say. I told you it takes, requires or expects some sort of maturity to deeply delve into these profound things. They appear profound, they appear little, mysterious or enigmatic because we are inside this confusion. We are inside this enigma, we are not out of it. So and that is also an inevitable, predicament that you cannot escape. You need to understand being very much an integral part of this confusion. So Tell me, do you read the same way you scroll? A question to ponder over. You wanted that to be repeated? Okay. I asked you, do you read the same way you scroll? So let's talk about this important thing, media and perception of this session. So, what does media do? What role does it play in creating that reality or shaping that reality or identity for you and me? And how does it do? So, media recognizes perception, it changes our sense of time. That is an important thing to remember. So, it changes our sense of time, attention, and memory. So, this is why long novels feel difficult today. You don't feel like reading novels, right? And short videos you're obsessed with, of course, feel addictive. Culture follows technology, not the other way around. So now you understand the shift, why this has warranted this change, and what kind of culture we are talking about, and how it is created, that cultural identity is created through media than some sort of inheritance that you have not inherited any of these things, but they are constructed through continuous exposure to the reality presented on screen through different media. So we have one, more important character or a personality in this field of media and ideology, Stuart Hall, and we also discussed something of him and his contribution to that cultural studies. But here we revisit him again because now we return to Stuart Hall, but in a media context. Hall tells us media messages are encoded in ideology, but they are not actually transmitted as they are, or they are not received as they are, as media intends them to be. So, but audiences decode them differently. That is an important message that you need to remember. Media messages are coded with ideology, but audience decodes it or receives them differently. So meaning is not injected, it is negotiated. Uh, if I have to make it clearer to you with an example, if two people can watch the same news story, they might walk away with opposite beliefs. So the reception is different from individual to individual, though they watched the same news story. So ideology coded in message or in that news is different. What was received or constructed out of it by the audience is different. So how does this work? There enters this postmodernism, you can say. Or if you have to fall back and understand little more on how news and power and framing happen or work here, media does not lie all the time. I mean, you don't have to feel that since things transmitted or telecast or on screen do induce or create different feelings in different people, you need not feel that media lie all the time. It does not have to. In fact, it frames, it selects, it emphasizes. That's its role. What is shown appears important, and what is ignored disappears. And that, my friends, is power without shouting. In order to understand this power without shouting, it's a different power altogether. We'll talk about it when we take up Michel Foucault, when we briefly talk about his discipline and punish, a great work. Okay, because he's not talking about that police or army power or some administrative power here. It's a power of disciplining, disciplinary power, in other words. Okay.